7% Homemaking Through the Decades, Audiobook edition. The 1960s, change at the kitchen table. The 1960s arrived with the comfortable domestic arrangements of the 1950s still largely intact and left with them fundamentally questioned. The decade's social upheavals, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the women's liberation movement, the counterculture, all had domestic dimensions. The homemaker who began the decade clipping recipes from Good Housekeeping might end it reading Ms. Magazine and reconsidering, at least privately, what her life was supposed to look like. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, named what many educated women had been feeling without being able to articulate, that the domestic role, however comfortable, had been sold to them as a complete life when it was not, for many women, sufficient. The book sold millions of copies, which suggests the feeling was widespread. The homemaker who read it was not necessarily abandoning her household, most were not, but she was seeing it differently and seeing herself differently within it. The contraceptive pill, available from 1960, gave women for the first time reliable control over their reproductive lives. The implications for homemaking were profound and took years to fully unfold. Smaller families, more planned families, women who could choose when and whether to have children in a way their mothers could not. The pill did not immediately change the domestic arrangements of the 1960s household, but it began the slow process of making those arrangements genuinely optional in a way they had never been before. The decade also brought the Great Society's expansion of social programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty, that changed the context of homemaking for less affluent families. The food stamp program expanded significantly. School lunch programs were improved. Community health centers opened. The homemaker in a low-income family had more institutional support than at any previous point in American history, even as the culture's domestic ideal remained firmly middle-class and white. The decade asked a question that had not been asked before, at least not so loudly. Is this enough? Is this what I chose? For many women, answering it honestly took the rest of the century. The 1960s kitchen was simultaneously becoming more convenient and more culturally complicated. Convenience foods reached new levels of sophistication and availability. Cake mixes, frozen pot pies, instant everything. And simultaneously, a counter movement was beginning. The first stirrings of what would become the food revolution, in which cooking from scratch with fresh ingredients was revalued as something more than mere necessity. The 1960s kitchen balanced convenience with a growing consciousness about food. Cake mixes from Betty Crocker and Pillsbury dominated the baking shelf. Frozen pot pies offered the individual meal as convenience product. Jiffy Pop brought the theatrical convenience of stovetop popcorn. Tang became the astronaut's drink in the kitchen. Cool Whip entered the refrigerator case as non-dairy whip topping. But at the same time, Julia Child and the French chef were beginning the cooking education revolution. Craig Claiborne's food writing in the New York Times was elevating home cooking as a cultural subject, and the microwave oven was appearing in commercial settings, slowly approaching the home. Julia Child's The French Chef debuted on PBS in 1963 and changed what American homemakers thought cooking could be. Child's approach, demonstrating complex techniques with humor, self-deprecation, and genuine pleasure, invited the viewer into a relationship with food that convenience culture had been quietly discouraging. She dropped things, she made mistakes, and corrected them on camera. She ate enthusiastically. She was, in every way, the anti-TV dinner, and she was enormously popular, which suggested that the appetite for real cooking had not been extinguished by the frozen food aisle. The 1960s dinner table reflected the decade's productive tension between convenience and the new seriousness about food. Fondue was the dinner party centerpiece, communal, interactive, requiring attention and producing theater. Swedish meatballs were party food made with Campbell's soup. Shrimp cocktail was the elegant appetizer of the affluent household. Caesar salad was prepared tableside as dinner party theater. Beef bourguignon brought Julia Child's influence to the home table. Chicken Kiev was the fancy restaurant dish attempted at home. Quiche Lorraine was the French import that became the 1960s brunch, and grasshopper pie, mint and chocolate in a cookie crust, was the decade's showstopper dessert. Lifestyle and well-being. The 1960s homemaker's well-being was complicated by the decade's rising consciousness about women's roles. The homemaker who had been perfectly content in the 1950s with her domestic arrangements might find in the 1960s that the culture around her was increasingly suggesting she should not be, that her contentment was a form of false consciousness produced by the very system that confined her. This was not an easy message to receive, and the response to it varied enormously. The decade's counterculture offered alternative domestic arrangements that the mainstream homemaker mostly observed from a distance. Communes, shared households, radically informal domestic setups. These were not options for most women with mortgages and children and husbands who left for the train at 7:15. But the visibility of alternatives, even rejected alternatives, changed the sense of what was chosen rather than simply given. She watched the news from a comfortable distance, the marches, the sit-ins, the burning, and then she made dinner, and thought about it while she made dinner. The civil rights movement was, for some homemakers, a direct challenge and an invitation. The white suburban homemaker who watched the Birmingham campaign on television was being asked to think about the relationship between her comfortable domestic life and the country it existed within. Some responded by joining or supporting the movement. Most responded by watching from a distance. With complicated feelings, they did not always have the vocabulary to articulate. Skills development. The 1960s homemaker who took Julia Child seriously was undertaking a genuine culinary education, learning to make a proper béarnaise sauce, to debone a duck, to produce a soufflé that rose reliably. These were real skills that required practice, patience, and the willingness to fail and try again. The homemaker who followed Child through the French chef's episodes was more skilled in the kitchen at the end of the decade than at the beginning, and she knew more about food, technique, and pleasure than the convenience culture of the previous decade had encouraged her to know. The skills the 1960s expanded were substantial. French cooking techniques arrived through Julia Child's PBS revolution. Browning, braising, sauce building, the proper use of butter and wine. Wine knowledge developed as Americans began learning to drink and evaluate wine with more sophistication. Fondue hosting required mastering the social technology of the communal pot. Quiche and savory tart making brought French imports into the home kitchen. Salad creativity moved beyond iceberg lettuce with bottled dressing. International cooking brought ethnic cuisines into the American home. Food criticism and evaluation developed taste as a cultivated skill. And for some homemakers, the civil rights consciousness activated a new kind of political engagement that would reshape their domestic priorities. Fun and creativity. The 1960s homemakers' creative expression expanded in directions the previous decade had not permitted. Pop art aesthetics reached interior decoration, bold prints, geometric patterns, and bright colors that would have looked alarming in a 1955 ranch house were fashionable by 1967. The fondue pot on the dining room table was a design object as much as a cooking vessel. The hostess was now also an aesthete, and being thought of as having taste was a form of social currency. The creative life of the 1960s home ranged widely. Pop art home decor with bold colors, graphic patterns, and Scandinavian design. The fondue party as interactive communal dining and social creativity. International entertaining as adventurous hospitality, introducing guests to foreign cuisines. Macrame and craft as handmade objects of domestic art. Record albums as serious domestic entertainment investment. Garden design as the suburban garden became an aesthetic project. For some homemakers, protest and civic engagement opened a new creative outlet. And the dinner party conversation, animated by the decade's upheavals in politics, culture, and consciousness, became itself a creative form. Modern trends and innovations. In 1965, a loaf of bread cost 21 cents. Eggs were 53 cents a dozen. A gallon of milk was $1.05. Ground beef ran 60 cents a pound. A whole chicken was 43 cents a pound. A copy of Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking was $8. The median new home cost $22,000, and a new Ford Mustang could be had for $2,368. Women's magazines were 35 cents a copy. Median family income was $6,900 a year. A color television set cost $500, and a fondue set ran $12 to $30. The decade's innovations included Julia Child's television revolution, which was a cultural innovation as much as a culinary one. Color television bringing new vividness to domestic entertainment and advertising. The first commercial microwave ovens appearing in institutional settings. The pill transforming the planning horizon of domestic life. The Peace Corps creating a new generation of young Americans with international food experience who brought those influences home. And Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962, which began to change how Americans thought about pesticides, food production, and the environmental consequences of domestic choices. The 1960s community life of the homemaker was pulled in multiple directions. The suburban neighborhood networks of the 1950s persisted and remained important. But the decade's political upheavals, civil rights, Vietnam, women's liberation, brought some homemakers into a different kind of community. The political community, organized around shared values and shared action rather than simply shared geography. Community life in the 1960s home encompassed many forms. Civil rights organizing drew some homemakers into the movement to join or support the struggle. Anti-war activity produced peace marches and bake sales for peace organizations. The PTA was increasingly politicized around school integration and curriculum. Women's consciousness-raising groups emerged as a new community form, the decade's most significant innovation in how women gathered. The established neighborhood and church networks continued. Environmental awareness began to emerge through Rachel Carson's influence. Great Society programs organized community around federal initiatives, and suburban book clubs took on political texts alongside literary ones, with intellectual community becoming overtly engaged with the decade's debates. Family and relationships. The 1960s family was smaller than the 1950s family. The baby boom was winding down as the decade progressed, and the contraceptive pill was beginning to give women the reproductive choices that would produce the smaller families of the following decades. The relationship between husband and wife was, at least in the aspirational language of the decade, becoming more equal, though the daily reality of who cooked dinner, who cleaned the house, and who managed the children's schedules had not changed dramatically. Family life in the 1960s home showed the decade's tensions clearly. Smaller families were emerging as the baby boom ended. The pill enabled reproductive planning for the first time from 1960. Husband-wife relationships were beginning to be discussed as partnerships. Daughters were entering higher education in unprecedented numbers. Television was the children's companion, a source of considerable parental anxiety. The generation gap widened as children of the 1960s questioned parental values openly. Divorce rates began to rise as the family came to be understood as chosen rather than fixed, and mothers entered the paid workforce in growing numbers, beginning the transformation that would reshape domestic life for the rest of the century. Happens the fondue disaster. The fondue pot was the 1960s dinner party's most dramatic cooking vessel, and one homemaker invested in a particularly handsome copper one for her first fondue party. The cheese fondue required constant stirring and careful temperature management, neither of which she had fully mastered. The cheese seized, then it separated. She stirred more vigorously, which made things worse. She added more wine, which helped briefly, then made things worse again. The guests ate crackers and drank wine while she addressed the fondue with increasing focus and decreasing optimism. When the fondue finally achieved an acceptable consistency, somewhere between melted cheese and textured wallpaper paste, the guests gamely dipped their bread and pronounced it excellent. She sold the copper fondue pot the following year. The Julia Child ambition. Julia Child's The French Chef made complicated cooking look, if not easy, at least approachable. One homemaker decided to attempt bœuf bourguignon for a dinner party of 8. She spent the entire day on it, searing, braising, preparing the pearl onions and mushrooms as directed. When the guests arrived, the beef was perfect. What she had not anticipated was the volume of dishes the recipe required. She washed dishes from 8 in the evening until 11. The next time she served beef bourguignon, she made it the day before. Julia Child had mentioned this in the headnote. She read headnotes more carefully after that. Step into their shoes. It is an October afternoon in 1965, and she has the Feminine Mystique book on the kitchen table. She has been reading it in 20-minute intervals between the morning's work and the afternoon pickup. She has read 4 chapters. She is finding it simultaneously exhilarating and troubling in a way she cannot quite resolve. She puts the book away when she hears the school bus. The children come in hungry and loud, and she is glad to see them, genuinely glad, in a way that complicates the morning's reading. She loves this life. She also sometimes wonders what else she might have done with her degree in English literature, which she has not specifically used since 1953. Both things are true, and she is not sure how to hold them simultaneously. Tonight, she is making Julia Child's chicken in wine, poulet au vin rouge, she says to herself, practicing the French that she is learning from the television program. She has been cooking Julia's recipes for 2 years now and has become, she knows, a significantly better cook. This is not nothing. She finds genuine pleasure in the doing of it, in the technique, in the way a properly browned piece of chicken smells. Dinner is at 6:30. Her husband is home at 6 and asks how her day was, and she says, good, fine, busy. She does not tell him about the book because she is not sure what she would say about it. After dinner, she reads the children the chapter of Charlotte's Web thereon. The death of Charlotte, which makes her youngest cry, which makes her cry a little too, which surprises her every time. She finishes the book on a Thursday afternoon in November. She sits with it for a few minutes after the last page. Then she makes a note to herself in the small notebook she keeps in the kitchen drawer about what she wants to do next. Take a continuing education class in the spring. Literature, maybe, or history. Something that uses the part of her mind that the recipe file does not. She registers for the class in January. She attends it on Tuesday evenings when her husband is home with the children. It is the best Tuesday evenings she has had in years. Her week, October 1965 Monday, grocery shopping, PTA committee meeting, the Feminine Mystique, Chapter 3. Tuesday, school pickup, homework, pot roast assembled, and cooking. Charity work, Julia Child on TV, practicing French pronunciation. Thursday, book finished, note in kitchen notebook, planning spring continuing education class. Friday, fondue night, successful this time, guests delighted. Saturday, farmer's market, children's activities, baking for Sunday. Sunday, poulet au vin rouge, the best dinner in months. Recipes from the 1960s. These recipes reflect the decade's productive tension between convenience and the new seriousness about cooking. Some are the quick solutions of a busy household. Some are the Julia Child-inspired ambitions of a homemaker discovering that cooking could be an art. Chicken in red wine. Poulet au vin rouge. Julia Child's French cooking revolution brought this bistro classic into American home kitchens. It is not a quick recipe, but it is forgiving and deeply satisfying, and it improves dramatically when made a day ahead. Ingredients: 1 whole chicken cut into pieces, salt and pepper, 4 ounces of bacon or lardons, 1 onion diced, 2 cloves of garlic, 2 cups of red wine, burgundy if possible, 1 cup of chicken stock, a bouquet garni of thyme, bay, and parsley, 8 ounces of mushrooms quartered, 1 cup of pearl onions, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour for thickening. Directions: brown the bacon in a Dutch oven, remove and set aside. Season the chicken and brown it in the bacon fat on all sides, then remove. Sauté the diced onion and garlic until soft. Return chicken and bacon, add wine, stock, and bouquet garni. Cover and braise at 325 degrees for 1 hour until chicken is tender. Meanwhile, sauté mushrooms and pearl onions in butter until golden. Remove chicken, strain sauce, and thicken with a butter-flour mixture called beurre manier. Return chicken, mushrooms, and onions to the pot and serve with bread or potatoes. This is better the next day. Make it ahead if you can. Grasshopper pie, the 1960s dinner party dessert, mint green, creamy, and spectacular. The color alone made it worth making. It requires no baking and can be made days ahead. Ingredients: 24 chocolate sandwich cookies, crushed, 5 tablespoons of melted butter, 32 large marshmallows, half a cup of milk, a quarter cup of green creme de menthe, 3 tablespoons of white creme de cacao, 2 cups of heavy cream whipped to soft peaks. Directions: mix the cookie crumbs with melted butter and press firmly into a 9-inch pie plate. Chill the crust while preparing the filling. Melt the marshmallows with milk over low heat, stirring constantly, then cool completely. Stir in the creme de menthe and creme de cacao. Fold in the whipped cream gently. Pour into the chilled crust and freeze until firm, at least 4 hours. Remove from freezer 10 minutes before serving. Serves 8 with drama. Swedish meatballs, the 1960s party standard, made by the hundreds for gatherings, served in an electric chafing dish to keep them warm. This is the classic cream sauce version. Ingredients: 1 pound of ground beef, half a pound of ground pork, half a cup of breadcrumbs soaked in a quarter cup of milk, 1 egg, 1 small onion, grated, salt, pepper, and nutmeg. For the sauce, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, 1 cup of beef broth, 1 cup of sour cream. Directions: combine meats, soaked breadcrumbs, egg, grated onion, and seasonings and mix well. Roll into 1-inch balls and brown in butter in batches, then set aside. Make the sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, and adding broth gradually. Simmer until thickened, then stir in sour cream off the heat. Return meatballs to the sauce and heat through gently. Serve over egg noodles or as party appetizers with toothpicks. What we learned and what we still use today. The 1960s homemaker's most important legacy may be that she asked the question. Not all of them asked it in the same way, and many of them asked it privately rather than publicly, and some of them decided that the answer was that they were where they wanted to be. But the asking itself changed something, in the homemaker, in the culture, in what was understood to be possible. Lessons from the 1960s. We still use today. Take a class. The homemaker, who registered for the continuing education course in January 1966, did something important for herself. You can do the same. Learn to cook from scratch. Julia Child was right. Real cooking is both more pleasurable and more nourishing than its convenience alternative. Make boeuf bourguignon a day ahead. This is practical advice with profound implications. Some of the best things in cooking and in life are better for having been allowed to develop. Ask the question, is this what I chose? Is this enough? Is not an ungrateful question. It is an honest one. The answer might be yes, but the asking matters. Read the headnotes. Whatever you are making, a recipe, a decision, a life, read the instructions all the way through before you begin. She made the chicken in red wine perfectly on the 3rd attempt. She registered for the class. She read the headnotes. Small things, all of them, and also not small at all.